What a spectacular joke I turned out to be, thinking loyalty would earn me respect. I should have walked away the first time he made me feel small and called it love. My name is Lydia, and for years I built a life meant for two. Now I'm the woman who tore it all down, on purpose. I set the scrapbook on the table with a small, hopeful smile. Todd barely glanced at it before tossing it aside like it was an empty wrapper. Useless, he muttered, his voice sharp enough to cut. I blinked, my heart tightening in my chest. What? What is this? He said, waving dismissively at the book I had poured weeks of my life into. I swallowed hard, willing my voice to stay steady. It's a collection of our memories, I said softly. Everything we've been through. I thought you'd appreciate something meaningful. Todd rolled his eyes and leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. What we've been through? He scoffed. Please. I'm tired of all this emotional crap. You could have gotten me something useful. Instead, you waste time on this. Sentimental garbage. Each word felt like a slap. I clenched my hands in my lap under the table, squeezing until my nails dug into my palms. Was I really that ridiculous to him? Had I been fooling myself all this time? I opened my mouth to say something, to defend myself, but he cut me off before I could speak. This. He gestured again at the scrapbook, disgusted. Is embarrassing. A thick silence filled the room. I stared at him, this man I had once loved with every fiber of my being, wondering, when did we start speaking different languages? When did I become nothing more than a burden to him? I took a breath, slow and shaky. Todd, I thought... No, he said sharply, standing up and running a hand through his hair in frustration. You don't get it, Lydia. You never get it. This, he motioned between us, isn't working anymore. You're not working anymore. I need someone who adds value to my life. Someone who doesn't drag me down with pathetic little projects like this. My stomach twisted into knots. What was he saying? Was he really going to throw away everything over this? I forced myself to meet his gaze, even as the floor seemed to sway beneath me. And you think this is the way to tell me? My voice shook, but stayed strong enough to carry across the room. He smirked, that cruel, condescending smile I used to mistake for charm. I've met someone else. Her name's Mara. She's 20. She knows how to have fun. Unlike you. I sat there, frozen, watching him deliver the news like he was commenting on the weather. My heart felt like it had cracked open, but somehow I kept breathing. How long had he been planning this? How long had I been living inside a lie? He watched me, waiting for a reaction, maybe tears, maybe begging, but I gave him none. Instead, I folded my hands calmly on the table, even though I could feel my world tilting sideways. I see, I said quietly. That was all I could manage. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was heavy, almost solid, the way it gets right before a storm breaks. He shook his head, almost like he pitied me, and turned toward the door. I deserve more, he muttered, almost to himself. And with that, he walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him like the final period at the end of a very long, very bitter sentence. I sat there alone, staring at the scrapbook lying open on the table. The picture smiled up at me, moments frozen in time, back when I still believed we were building something real. Was I really that foolish? Had I been loving a ghost all this time? I pressed my palm flat against the table, feeling the wood cool under my skin. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, breathing in and out as the reality slowly, cruelly wrapped itself around me. What do I do now? I didn't have the answer. But somewhere deep inside the heartache, a tiny flicker of something else stirred. Not anger, not sadness. Hope. I sat there for a long time after Todd left, the minutes dripping by like slow, heavy raindrops. At some point, my hand moved on its own, flipping absent-mindedly through the pages of the scrapbook. Each photo, each handwritten note, Each pressed flower told a story that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Was it all a waste? Had I been the only one who believed? A deep ache settled in my chest, but tangled up in the ache was something unexpected, a sliver of relief. Maybe I had been holding on to something that needed to break. Maybe, just maybe. This wasn't the end of my life. Maybe it was the beginning. Still, the fear crept in, stubborn and sharp. What if I can't do this? What if I'm just fooling myself? I pressed my palms against my eyes until the colors behind them bloomed into stars. I needed air. I needed space to think, to breathe. I grabbed my purse, slung it over my shoulder, and without really knowing where I was going, I stepped out into the evening. The sky was bruised purple and gold, the kind of sunset that would have made me smile once. Tonight, it barely registered. I drove on autopilot, the familiar streets blurring into one another, until I found myself parked in front of Grace's house. For a moment, I hesitated. Would she think I was pathetic? A fool for believing in something so broken? Before I could change my mind, I texted her. Me. Can I come in? The reply came almost instantly. Grace. Always. I climbed out of the car, my legs trembling slightly, and made my way up the steps. Before I even knocked, the door swung open. Grace took one look at my face, and her expression shifted from confusion to fury in a heartbeat. What did he do now? She asked, her voice tight. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come right away. Instead, my throat closed up, and for the first time that night, my vision blurred with tears. Without waiting for an answer, Grace pulled me into a hug. Kitchen or couch? She asked, her voice gentler now. Kitchen, I croaked. The smell of something sweet, maybe cinnamon, wrapped around me as I stepped inside. Her house was small, warm, cluttered in a way that felt like a real life was being lived there. I hadn't realized how empty my own house had started to feel. She set a glass of wine in front of me and sat down across the table, her hands folded neatly, waiting. I stared at the glass for a moment before finally whispering, He left me. For someone else. Grace's eyebrows shot up, her mouth falling open. I laughed bitterly, wiping at my face with the sleeve of my jacket. It's actually kind of funny when you think about it. I spent weeks making him something personal, something real, and he couldn't even fake caring for 5 minutes. Grace's chair scraped against the floor as she stood up and paced, fuming. I swear to God, Lydia, she said, her hands slicing through the air. One day, they're going to write books about how men like him survive this long without getting struck by lightning. I let out a shaky laugh. It wasn't much, but it felt good. Real. What are you going to do now? She asked, finally settling back into her seat. I stared down at the table, my fingers tracing invisible patterns on the wood grain. What was I going to do? Sit at home, cry over someone who never really saw me? Or was this my chance to finally choose me? I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I think I'm done begging for scraps of love. Grace smiled then. One of those wide, proud smiles that made her eyes crinkle. About damn time. For the first time that night, I believed it too. Somewhere deep inside all the wreckage, something stronger was starting to take root. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And for the first time in a very long time, I was ready. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Grace's kitchen table, warming the half-empty glass of wine still sitting in front of me. I hadn't meant to fall asleep there, but somehow it felt right. Safe. I blinked blearily, my body stiff from sleeping in the chair. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. I should have felt like a wreck. But strangely, I didn't. I felt clear, like something heavy had finally been peeled off my chest. I fumbled for my phone and winced at the flood of missed calls and texts. Todd. Of course. Todd. Where are you? We need to talk. Todd. You're overreacting. Todd. Lydia, don't throw everything away over one argument. One argument? I stared at the screen, a strange calm settling over me. Had he really convinced himself that years of dismissal, contempt, and betrayal could be summed up as one argument? Grace padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, yawning. She caught sight of my face and immediately perked up. Let me guess. Prince Charming. I snorted. More like Prince Gaslight. Grace chuckled and poured 2 cups of coffee. You answering him? I shook my head. No, I don't owe him anything. Saying it out loud made something inside me stand a little taller. We sat in comfortable silence, sipping coffee, the new day stretching out before us like a blank page. At some point, Grace glanced at me over her mug. So, what now? She asked, casual but curious. I set my cup down slowly. I think I need to go home, I said. Pack some things. Figure out what's next. Grace nodded, her face serious now. You want me to come with you? I considered it. The idea of walking into that house alone, facing all the memories, the shadows, it made my stomach twist. But some part of me knew I had to do it myself. I'll be okay, I said. Thanks, though. Grace squeezed my hand across the table. Call me if you need anything. Anything. I will, I promised. The drive back to my house felt surreal. Everything looked the same. The neat hedges Todd insisted we keep trimmed, the mailbox with our last name still printed neatly across it, but it all felt different. Like I was looking at a museum exhibit of a life that no longer belonged to me. I parked at the curb, taking a deep breath before stepping out. The house loomed in front of me, familiar and strange all at once. Inside, it was worse. The air still smelled faintly of Todd's cologne. His shoes were by the door. His jacket was thrown over the arm of the couch. It felt like he could walk in at any moment and pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I walked through the house methodically, grabbing what I needed: clothes, important papers, the small trinkets that meant something to me. Not to us, but to me. I didn't touch the scrapbook. I left it exactly where it was, lying face down on the table, its pages fluttering slightly in the breeze from the open window. When my bag was packed, I stood in the living room, surveying the space. Was I really ready to leave all this behind? Yes. Without hesitation, yes. I turned to go, but the sound of a key turning in the lock stopped me cold. The door creaked open, and Todd stepped inside, a cocky half-smile plastered across his face. Like he expected me to rush into his arms, to apologize for being upset. Instead, I straightened my spine and looked him dead in the eye. You're still here, he said, his tone light, almost teasing. I didn't smile. I was just leaving. Todd frowned, confused, as if he couldn't quite process the situation. Lydia, come on. Don't be dramatic. We can fix this. I let out a slow, steady breath. There's nothing to fix, Todd. You made your choice. He opened his mouth, probably to launch into one of his speeches about how unreasonable I was, how I was blowing things out of proportion. But I was already walking past him, my bag slung over my shoulder, my heart pounding with something fierce and unfamiliar. Freedom. As I reached the door, I turned back for one final look, not at Todd, but at the woman I used to be inside these walls. Goodbye. I stepped into the sunlight without looking back. I didn't stop driving until I reached Grace's house again. As soon as she opened the door and saw my face, calm but fierce, she didn't ask any questions. She simply stepped aside and let me in. That night, I lay awake on the couch, staring at the dark ceiling. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the wood settling. I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself, but the chill inside me wasn't from the air. Was it really over? Was I strong enough to see it through? My phone buzzed on the coffee table, cutting through the silence. I didn't have to check to know who it was. For a moment, I considered ignoring it again. But something inside me, something new and sharper, whispered, "Face it." I reached for the phone and answered without saying a word. "Lydia!" Todd's voice poured through the speaker, urgent and pleading. "Please, we need to talk. I made a mistake. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch until he spoke again. I miss you, he said. I don't want to lose you over something stupid. Something inside me twisted, but I forced myself to stay still. You didn't lose me over something stupid, I said finally, my voice low and steady. You lost me the moment you decided I wasn't enough. There was a long pause. I could almost hear him scrambling for the right words. I was stupid, he said. I can change. We can fix this. Fix this. Again with those words, like it was just a dent in the wall he could plaster over. I sat up straighter, gripping the phone tighter. No, Todd, I said. You don't get to break something and then act surprised when it shatters. Lydia. I'm done, I said, cutting him off. Don't call me again. And I hung up. My hands were trembling, but I had never felt steadier in my life. I placed the phone face down on the table, turned off the light, and let the darkness settle around me like a shield. The next morning, I packed my things properly. Grace helped me load my car with a fierce kind of energy, like she was helping me prepare for battle. You're doing the right thing, she said, handing me the last bag. I know, I said. And this time, I meant it. When I pulled up to my house, Todd's car was already in the driveway. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, breathing in deeply before stepping out. He was waiting by the front door, arms crossed, trying to look composed. But I could see the cracks in his mask, the slight tremble in his jaw, the darting of his eyes. You're really going through with this, he said as I approached. I nodded, keys jangling lightly in my hand. I am. This is ridiculous, he snapped, his voice rising. You're throwing everything away. No, I said calmly. You threw it away. I'm just picking up the pieces. His face darkened. You think you can do better than me? It wasn't a question. It was a challenge, the last desperate jab of a man who never thought he could lose. I smiled then, not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with something cleaner. Something like peace. I already am, I said. I pulled the folded papers from my bag and handed them to him. He took them, frowning as he read the header. Divorce documents. This is insane, he said, his voice cracking. You're being petty, Lydia. Vindictive. No, I said, my voice soft but unshakable. I'm being free. I turned, opened the door to my house, and stepped inside, leaving Todd standing alone on the porch, holding the paperwork like it might burn his hands. The click of the lock sliding into place behind me sounded like the final note in a symphony. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the silence that followed. The days that followed moved slowly, like syrup sliding down glass. I didn't hear from Todd again, except for a curt email from his lawyer acknowledging receipt of the divorce papers. I half expected a dramatic confrontation, some desperate last-ditch effort, but there was nothing. Only silence. And honestly, the silence felt like a gift. Without Todd's constant presence, his demands, his criticisms, his invisible leash, the house felt bigger somehow. Lighter. I packed up the last of his belongings in cardboard boxes and stacked them neatly by the front door. No shouting. No dramatic scenes. Just clean, quiet endings. Grace came by one afternoon, her arms full of takeout and a bottle of wine tucked under one arm. How's freedom treating you? She teased as she kicked the door shut behind her. I smiled, a real one this time. It's strange, I admitted. Good, but strange. We sat cross-legged on the living room floor, picking at noodles and laughing over nothing, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't pretending to be okay. I was okay, or at least on my way. Later that night, as I wandered through the now half-empty house, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me didn't look lost. She looked strong, changed. I touched the glass lightly with my fingertips, almost as if to reassure myself that she was real. Who are you becoming? The question didn't scare me like it once would have. Instead, it made my heart beat faster in a good way. In the quiet that wrapped itself around me, I found pieces of myself I thought had been lost. My love for photography, buried under years of Todd dismissing it as a waste of time. My craving for travel put on hold because it wasn't practical. I dusted off my old camera from the closet and spent hours wandering the local parks, capturing sunsets, laughing children, strangers holding hands. Every click of the shutter felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. One afternoon, standing by the lake, I caught my reflection in the water, camera in hand, hair tangled from the breeze, cheeks flushed from the sun. I looked alive. My phone buzzed in my pocket, dragging me back to the present. Todd's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I just stared at it, feeling nothing. No anger, no sadness, just indifference. I let the call ring out without answering. Then, without hesitation, I blocked his number. He didn't belong in this new life I was building. He was a chapter I had closed. A week later, I stood in front of the vacation house, the one I had bought in secret, the one that had once been meant for both of us. Now it was mine alone. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows, pooling on the hardwood floors like spilled gold. The lake glittered beyond the glass, serene and endless. I set down my overnight bag and just stood there, drinking it all in. No ghosts, no chains, just possibility. My heart ached, not from sadness, but from something deeper, a kind of reverence for what I had survived, for what I was about to build. Grace called later that evening. "How's the castle?" she joked. "Perfect," I said, stepping out onto the deck, the breeze lifting my hair. "It's everything." There was a pause on the line. "You know," she said softly, "you're allowed to be proud of yourself." I smiled, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. "I am?" As I hung up and watched the sun sink behind the trees, a single thought filled me, steady and fierce. This is just the beginning. The first few weeks at the lake house felt like breathing for the first time after being underwater for too long. Every morning, the light would spill across the floor in golden ribbons, and I would wake up without that old, heavy knot of anxiety in my chest. It was strange how empty space could feel so full, full of possibilities, full of myself. One afternoon, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee and my laptop balanced on my knees, I opened an old folder labeled Dreams. Inside were sketches of business plans, scribbled notes from workshops I'd once attended, ideas I had buried deep because Todd had said they were silly or unrealistic. As I clicked through the files, something inside me stirred, a fire I thought had burned out. Why not now? What do I have to lose? The idea of starting my own consulting firm had once terrified me. Todd's voice would echo in my head. "It's too risky, Lydia. You're not cut out for that kind of thing." But now, sitting here alone, that voice felt distant, powerless. I opened a fresh document and started typing. Hours slipped by. By nightfall, the rough blueprint for my new company had taken shape. Phoenix Consulting. Grace's words came back to me, clear as if she were sitting right beside me. "You're rising from the ashes, Lydia. Own it." I smiled and leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms above my head. The world outside the window was melting into pink and purple shadows, the lake turning to glass in the dusk. Maybe for once, I didn't need someone else's permission to chase something that made my heart beat faster. A few days later, after many late nights and scribbled to-do lists, I nervously clicked Submit on my business registration. It was official. Phoenix Consulting was real. And it was mine. I called Grace the moment the confirmation email hit my inbox. "Guess what?" I said, trying and failing to keep the excitement out of my voice. She gasped. "You did it, didn't you?" "I did," I laughed. "I actually did." Grace whooped so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "You are a freaking legend, Lydia," she shouted. "I'm coming over. We're celebrating." When she arrived an hour later, she had a bottle of champagne tucked under one arm and a pizza box in the other. "Classy as ever," I teased, but my heart was so full it could have burst. We sat out on the deck, wrapped in blankets, clinking our plastic cups together under the blanket of stars. To you, Grace said, grinning. To freedom, to phoenixes, and to never letting anyone dim your light again. I blinked hard against the sudden sting of tears and raised my cup. To new beginnings. As the night stretched on, we made lists of ridiculous goals. Travel to Italy. Learn to surf. Host a massive party just because we could. And somewhere between the second slice of pizza and the third refill of champagne, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. The future didn't feel like a looming shadow or a tightrope stretched over a pit of fear. It felt wide open, like a field after a storm, wild and fertile and waiting. The next morning, I woke up with a slight headache and a full heart. I stood on the deck with my coffee, watching the sun burn away the mist over the lake. A soft buzz from my phone pulled me from the moment. An email. Subject line, speaking opportunity, industry conference. I frowned, blinking at the screen. Was this real? I opened it quickly. They had heard about Phoenix Consulting through a friend of a friend. They wanted me to share my story, my journey, from brokenness to building something new. Me, on a stage, telling my story. The thought made my stomach flip, but not with fear, with excitement. Could I really do it? I stared at the blinking cursor in the email draft, my fingers hovering above the keyboard. Then I smiled and typed back 2 simple words. I'd love to. The day of the conference arrived faster than I expected. Standing backstage, I wiped my palms on my dress for the 3rd time. The low hum of the audience buzzed just beyond the thick velvet curtain. Somewhere out there were hundreds of faces I had never met, waiting to hear my story. My stomach twisted into knots. For a fleeting second, doubt crept in. What am I doing here? Who am I to stand in front of all these people and talk about strength? I closed my eyes, steadying my breathing. I thought of the lake house. I thought of the sleepless nights, the tears, the terrifying first steps into the unknown. I thought of the woman who walked out of her own front door and never looked back. That woman wasn't weak. She was unstoppable. I opened my eyes just as the announcer called my name. The spotlight hit me, blinding and hot as I walked onto the stage. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, but my legs were steady. I stepped up to the podium, gripped the sides for a moment, and smiled at the sea of expectant faces. My name is Lydia, I began, my voice clear, carrying into the far corners of the room. And a year ago, I couldn't have imagined standing here. I paused, letting the silence settle. Back then, my life looked perfect from the outside. I had the house, the marriage, the checklist that everyone tells you should make you happy. But inside, I was drowning. A few heads in the front row nodded, small but visible gestures of recognition. I spent years trying to be enough for someone who didn't believe in me. I bent myself into shapes I didn't recognize, thinking if I just tried harder, loved harder, sacrificed more, it would finally be enough. My voice trembled slightly, but I didn't hide it. I leaned into it. Because it was real. But it never was. A ripple of understanding moved through the crowd. I smiled again, this time steadier. And when I finally realized that the life I was clinging to was already gone, I let go. It was terrifying. It was devastating. And it was the best thing I ever did. The words spilled from me now, not rehearsed, but lived. I started from scratch. I built Phoenix Consulting out of a broken heart and a stubborn belief that I deserved better. And I stand here today, not because I did everything perfectly, but because I refused to let my past define my future. The applause started softly, then grew louder, filling the auditorium. I let it wash over me, not as validation, but as connection. We had all been broken in some way. And yet here we were, still standing. After the speech, people lined up to talk to me. Some shared their own stories, divorces, career restarts, second chances at life. Others simply hugged me, no words needed. "You gave me hope," one woman whispered, tears in her eyes. "You made me believe it's not too late," said another. Each conversation wove a new thread into the tapestry of my healing. Later that night, back at the lake house, I sat on the deck with a blanket around my shoulders and a glass of wine cradled in my hands. The stars stretched endlessly overhead. The lake mirrored them perfectly, 1,000 points of light dancing across the water. I closed my eyes and breathed it all in. The fear, the pride, the infinite, staggering freedom of starting over. For the first time in years, I didn't wonder what Todd would think. I didn't shrink myself to fit into someone else's version of enough. I had become enough for myself. As the night deepened, I picked up my notebook, the same one I'd scribbled dreams in just a few months ago, and added a new line at the bottom of the list. Live without fear. I underlined it twice, smiling to myself, because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Months slipped by, like pages turning in a book I was finally proud to write. Phoenix Consulting thrived beyond anything I had imagined when I first scribbled down the idea, knees tucked under my chin on the deck of the lake house. Clients came, projects grew, my calendar filled, but not with things I dreaded. I chose my work. I chose my life. Grace remained my constant lighthouse, cheering every small victory and reminding me, during the rare bad days, just how far I had come. Sometimes, usually late at night with a cup of tea, cooling between my hands, I would catch myself reflecting on it all, the girl I had been, the woman I was becoming. There was no bitterness left for Todd, no anger, only a quiet kind of gratitude. After all, it was losing him that forced me to find myself. One chilly evening, wrapped in my favorite blanket, I sat out on the deck and flipped through a new scrapbook, not of memories made for someone else, but memories made for me. Photos of sunsets at the lake, snapshots from business trips where I stood on stages and spoke my truth, laughing selfies with Grace, glasses of wine raised high, tickets from a spontaneous trip to Italy, folded carefully into a side pocket. This was my life now. Messy. Unpredictable, gloriously mine. I thought about the version of me that once sat silently at a table, watching the man she loved throw her heart into the trash without a second thought. And I wanted to reach back through time, to touch her shoulder and whisper, "You're going to be okay. You're going to be more than okay." The thought made me smile, because she had been brave. She had walked through the fire. And here I was, sitting on the other side of it, stronger than I had ever believed possible. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and something sweet I couldn't quite place. I closed my eyes and made a promise to myself, simple but sacred. I will never forget what it cost me to come back to life. Not in the moments of triumph, not in the quiet, ordinary days, not ever. Because starting over isn't about erasing the past. It's about honoring it, about carrying the lessons forward without carrying the pain. Somewhere inside the house, my phone buzzed. A new client inquiry, maybe, or a text from Grace plotting our next adventure. But for now, I stayed still, breathing in the night air, feeling the solidness of the earth beneath me, the limitless sky above. I had lost almost everything I thought defined me, and in doing so, I had finally found myself.